Hello, and welcome to the 22nd BrettCast episode, the sort of podcast where I take all my segments and mash them into one longer form video that releases a few times a month. Starting things off in this episode is going to be a double shot of gaming talk. First, I'm going to be discussing and giving my thoughts on the campaign of Call of Duty World at War. Second, I'm going to be discussing and giving my thoughts on the mobile game Summoner's War Chronicles. After that, it's What's New With, where I'm going to be talking about some new Transformers stuff. And then I will be going over to movie and TV talk, where I'm going to be discussing and giving my thoughts on the DC animated movie Superman, Man of Tomorrow. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the first part of the Gaming Talk segment. In this part, I'm going to be discussing and giving my thoughts on the campaign for Call of Duty World at War. Let's get into it. Unlike most World War II FPS games, this game starts you off in what I think is a Japanese prisoner of war camp where you're going to be executed. And after seeing one of your fellow soldiers get that same fate, too. But before you meet that fate, you are rescued and you and your squad fight your way out of there. It honestly is quite a good opening for this campaign that really does a good job of teaching you what to look out for throughout the rest of the campaign. Specifically, you have to watch out for snipers that hide up in the tops of trees, and also bonsai charges that will kill you in a one hit if you are not careful. But that's just for the part of the campaign that is focused on the Americans fighting the Japanese. The other part of the campaign has you playing a part in the Russians' push into the heart of Germany. This is the game where we are introduced to one of Call of Duty's most famous and recognizable characters, Reznov. But yeah, you switch between America and Japan versus Japan stuff, and Russia versus Germany stuff throughout the campaign. But damn if this campaign isn't brutal as hell. They do not shy away from anything, and I love it, honestly. The most brutal thing about World at War's campaign is just how difficult it is, even on the easiest difficulty setting. Yeah, I played the campaign on Recruit, and I would die upwards of 2 to 3 times or more per mission. I don't know what it is, but those enemies really love throwing grenades at all of the places. And every other place I've heard about this campaign, it's that it's nearly impossible on veteran difficulty because of the grenade spam. So, most people recommend not playing World War War's campaign on veteran. You have one mission that was a vehicle mission, and it actually wasn't that bad. I'm glad they went for a third-person camera when driving the tank, so I could actually see the enemies around me. Yeah. There is that one mission with the guy that's constantly yelling at you to take out those fucking PT boats. And yeah, it is kind of annoying after a bit, but it's really not that difficult to get through. I will say though, this game has a really great soundtrack too that really enhances the missions. The moment where you're just like plowing through enemies with this hard rock guitar and orchestra music playing in the background, it really just makes you feel awesome. Even the PT boat mission has this really tense drum thing going on in the soundtrack, which is really awesome too. World at War's campaign, while on the more difficult side, is definitely one of my favorite Call of Duty campaigns and is one of the 100% best World War Call of Duty games out there. In terms of all the World War II FPS games that I have played, though, World at War still doesn't surpass Battlefield 5 for me. But Call of Duty World at War has a good and enjoyable campaign that I would definitely recommend playing. And that's gonna do it for this part, so let's move on to the next. Hello, and welcome to the second part of the Gaming Talk segment. In this part, I'm going to be discussing and giving my thoughts on the mobile game Summoner's War Chronicles. Let's get into it. I've probably said this a number of times when I talk about various video games on this channel, but I did try to like this one, and there's an overwhelming amount of stuff I don't like that made me stop playing the game. For all purposes, and despite that one can play this game through Steam and the Google Play Games beta on PC, this is a mobile game through and through. Yes, I've played Sky Arena, but that game is so far different from what Chronicles is that I don't think it's even fair to compare the two. I like to think that Com2Us, or however the freaking developers are called, was trying to make a Summoner's War game that is more closely related to that of, say, Genshin Impact or Tower of Fantasy, and of course incorporating all the things that makes a Summoner's War game a Summoner's War game. I feel like the things that make a Summoner's War game, that is part of what brings Chronicles down a bit. The part of that is basically having the game play itself, because a lot of what you can do can be done in a sort of AFK way. In theory, this would be nice, but I honestly think that it worked better in Sky Arena, but not so much here in Chronicles. The issue arises with the fact that your summoner has to talk to and interact with NPCs. This means that while you can have the game walk you to and from places and combat for you without having to interact with the game, I find it's made a little redundant when I have to click through NPC dialogue or click to skip said dialogue, and that to me takes away from being able to do so much stuff AFK, but that the player still does have to pay attention to what is going on. This is further exemplified with the fact that there are quest dungeons that when you go into them, you are required to play them manually the first time through, which again really takes away from being able to AFK through most of the game. I mean, there are actual dungeons, actual ones, not quest ones. You can just AFK your way through it, so I don't get some of these decisions. And to the fact that your AI monsters you have with you are pretty stupid. I can't tell you how many times they will actively stand in AoE damage and often get themselves killed. So, while the idea of being able to AFK combat is great, there are some positives to generally manually controlling your summoner and monsters together. Regardless, it is somewhat interesting how absolutely stupid the monster AI in this game is. Now, something this game likes to make you well aware of is the way elements work in the game. That is the way of that fire beats wind, wind beats water, and water beats fire. And I don't really get how they came up with wind beating water, but that's not my decision, but I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. The next problem that I have with this game is all about progression, because this game loves halting play progression as much as possible, because, it is essentially a mobile game. There were several times that my progress was halted because of not having a high enough power level. There are plenty of ways to increase power level, which makes it sound easier to level up in theory, but the game makes sure that the execution part is very much not easy to do at all. Power level seems to be calculated by your skill points you get as your account level increases, the level of your monsters you have out, which is determined by the runes they have, plus if those runes are enchanted. Other than that, you have crafted outfits and you have enhancing weapons and gear for your summoner. Now, a lot of that's really self-explanatory, and there are also very easy ways to accomplish some of them, but some of them are not. For one, you don't even unlock the ability to enchant runes until you reach a certain point in the story. So that means that enchanting runes for fairly new players isn't going to be relevant for a long time. Longer if you get stuck at a story dungeon because you're under power level. But when it comes to crafting outfits, this is the thing that frustrates me the most. Sure, it sounds easy on paper, but they really make it a lot more complicated than it needs to be, and of course, they do this because at the end of the day, this is a mobile game. They're gonna halt your progress. The execution of gathering materials in this game is such a chore, and yes, even if you do AFK mining and gathering is all tied to the overall skill known as processing. So everything related to mining and gathering is tied to the player's processing level. Gaining processing levels is done by going to a processing table and making a certain number of materials and then turning in a certain number of those materials and then choosing to level up your processing level. Same sort of thing can be done with cooking as well. Of course, those materials will range from very basic ones that are easy to find to ones that are really not at all easy to come by and may only be found in locations of the game that the player doesn't even have access to yet. And that really annoys me. However, what annoys me even more here is they made one more way to halt the progress of mining and gathering, which is by having a daily cap of how many materials you can gather and mine for. What happens when you hit the cap? Well, I want to be clear here before I explain this. I am on the Steam version of the game. So what it did was tell me that I could watch up to 5 ads. And each time I could do that, I could get 200 more mining and gathering slots. But when I clicked that I'd like to watch the ads, I was met with a message saying that you can only do that on the mobile version of the game. Okay, so is there another way on the Steam version of the game to increase your daily gathering and mining limits? Yes, and the only way to do it on the Steam version of the game is to pay $10 for the Summoner's Pass to get unlimited daily gathering and mining. Yep, you gotta pay real money for a stupid battle pass on the Steam version to do that. I, of course, didn't do that, and I just put up with the daily limit. Now, outfits are composed of 4 pieces, and I'm not kidding you when I tell you that because of the daily limit, it took me 3 days to make 1 piece of an outfit, and that is so stupid. Plus, there are some materials needed for outfit crafting that come from repeatable dungeons and the Tower of Ascension. Again, you may think those 2 things must make it easy, but no, it doesn't. That's because in either, you can only get so far because of your power level before the enemies are outright crushing you, and that's the whole reason I'd be doing these, things to get stuff that I need so I can use it to raise my power level. So I feel like doing these kind of defeats the purpose in raising your power level. The other thing is that while you can replay floors of the Tower of Ascension, you only get the reward the first time you do a floor. So again, what is the point of making them replayable? There are skill trees that are associated with the Tower of Ascension that aid in permanently increasing your power level, and to put points in them, you have to have a currency that you get from clearing floors in the Tower of Ascension. But again, your current power level is going to prevent you from going any further, and you don't get those rewards when replaying them. So again, what is the point of doing Tower of Ascension at all? Honestly, it's almost the same for repeatable dungeons too. I can only do them so many times before the enemies are too much for me to handle, but I need the materials to make into stuff that will help me, but I also need a higher power level to keep going with the dungeons. It's all really redundant and stupid. The last and kind of small thing in the grand scheme of things here, the UI is so cluttered on this screen. It's insane how much there is. The lower right hand side has all of the, attacks and whatnot, which comes out in this arrow shape. Then there's your camera options and AFK options. The top right of the screen has the summoner and monster health as well as monster attacks. There's some menu stuff up there as well. The top left has the map and other map related stuff, and the lower left has, network connections and other things that I'm not entirely sure what they are, but overall, there was a lot of clutter on the screen from the UI, and it's kinda ridiculous. Chronicles is just such a needlessly complicated game that it does a lot of progress halting and making me feel like everything I do in terms of trying to progress is ultimately pointless in the end. But as I've said plenty of times here, this is a mobile game, and all of this stuff is here by design, I'm gonna guess, and hoping that people will spend actual money on the microtransactions, and I understand that, but it doesn't mean I like it or want to be involved with this game anymore. This is why I think that Chronicles is a pretty awful game, and why I stopped playing it. But that's gonna do it for the Gaming Talk segment. Hello and welcome to the What's New With segment. In this segment, I'm going to be talking about a couple of upcoming Legacy Evolution and Legacy United figures. Let's get into it. First up is the Legacy Evolution Deluxe Class Medics. This is a repaint and slight remold of the Legacy Deluxe Class Crankcase figure, and just kind of less appealing in colors in my opinion. Sure, the red, black, and white would be just fine, but then they go and throw in that awful green, and that is where they lose me. Now, the strange thing to me is that Medics is supposedly a Protecto bot, and if that's the case, then why no ability to combine? I mean, sure, they're more of a backup member, but the assumption is that if one of the others goes down, then Medics could be there to form Defensors, so why not make this figure able to combine? Wait, I know the answer. It's because they'd have to spend a little time and money to make a new mold rather than repurposing an already existing one like they did here. I honestly will not be getting this one. The next one here is the Legacy United Titan Class Armada Universe Tidal Wave. Yes, we finally have official images of this massive Decepticon, and oh boy do they look good. Looking at the images, there's a lot going on with Tidal Wave. Of course, they gave him an obligatory crappy looking base mode that looks crappy and really doesn't need to be a thing. It also looks like the ship mode can be split into 3 smaller modes or something. I'm not really sure how this is all going to work. Of course, the robot mode looks so cool and is really the most important part in my opinion. I really wish I could afford to get one of these, because I totally would, but I can't, and sadly must skip this one. Now, for the last one here, we've got the next HasLab Transformers project, which is going to be the Robots in Disguise 2001 Universe Omega Prime. Here's the thing, growing up, 2001's RID was my jam. It was my first Transformers show that I ever watched. I remember my brother and I having several of the RID 2001 toys, and one of those I remember was the bigger Ultra Magnus, the combining one. Now, we never had Prime, but regardless, for me, this Omega Prime is like a dream come true, because I can't tell you how many times I have thought to myself, man, I would love to have another Ultra Magnus from RID 2001 because of the sake of nostalgia. These two figures look fantastic. I've heard that the designers of the original figures worked on this one, and that's awesome. No lights or sounds like the original figures, but I'm alright with that because that sort of stuff usually hinders the figures in one way or another. Both the robot and vehicle modes for Prime and Magnus look spot on, and their combined form looks awesome too. I like how they took the thing that sits on top of Ultra Magnus, which is now a entirely deluxe class figure. That's a cool touch. The only downside to all of this is the whole package is $250. I know I've said this before when it comes to how much I want a figure despite not being able to afford it, and I'm typically okay with that, but God, this one is hard. This one is hard. Because, this is one of those, this is my childhood moments, and I just don't want to let this pass, especially, because it's going to be beyond expensive once the crowdfunding process is over and the figure goes into production. So as much as $250 is a lot, it's going to be worse on the aftermarket, which means if I want one, I need to get $250 by like May or whenever the crowdfunding process begins to wind down. Either way, I really want this figure in my life, and I will try to get one, but I probably won't. But that's going to do it for the What's New With segment. Hello, and welcome to the Movie and TV Talk segment. In this segment, I'm going to be discussing and giving my thoughts on the DC animated movie Superman, Man of Tomorrow. Let's get into it. This movie starts with a young Clark Kent getting sad from an old black and white movie about aliens. We get about 5 minutes of Clark's childhood before Clark is getting ready for work and going to a reveal of a rocket that Lex Luthor and Star Labs built. Things go wrong at the launch, and Clark has to fly in and save the day. Next thing you know, Star Labs is reading something entering Earth's atmosphere, and Clark decides to meet it head on, and it ends up being this guy named Lobo. The two of them fight, and during the fight, a Star Labs janitor gets covered in purple stuff. Also, during the course of the fight, a Martian intervenes, which ends up being the opportunity that Clark needs to fly out to space, get a little pick-me-up from the sun. He comes back and deals with Lobo, who gets locked up. Clark heads back home, where he and his folks are met by a mysterious man that ends up being John Jones, aka Martian Manhunter. John and Clark chat, and John unlocks a pyramid thing that has a historical record of Krypton on it. John heads off. Clark's mom gives Clark the classic Superman outfit we all know and love. We go to Lois attempting to have an interview with Lobo, but things go sideways when an infected janitor guy shows up who has been causing chaos by draining energy from people. He shows up and decides to touch the energy shield keeping Lobo in and drains the energy from it and transforms further into some sort of alien creature. John and Superman go on the offensive and try to fight it, but the thing ends up absorbing Superman's powers, and when John tries to stop it, the creature uses heat vision and burns John to death in front of Superman. The creature goes about absorbing more energy while Clark enlists the help of Lex, who enlists the help of Lobo, and the three formulate a plan to attempt to stop this creature. They try to lure it to a power plant. Superman tries to take a crack at it first, but it doesn't go as planned. Lobo takes the next attempt but ends up blowing himself up. Superman decides the creature needs a weakness and lets it feed off of himself. Lex takes a ring of kryptonite off the remains of Lobo and puts it into a gun and shoots the creature and then shoots Superman, but John pops up and stops Lex. John goes after Lex to get the ring back, and Superman comes to the realization that he needs to appeal to the humanity of the creature and even makes a speech to some people, revealing to them who he is. The creature attempts to take a swing at a bridge full of people, but Superman stops it. The creature absorbs more of his power. The big problem is that the power plant reactor is going to blow, and Superman tries to get over there but doesn't have the strength, so the creature goes over there and absorbs the full energy of the reactor, which kills the creature for good. The movie ends with Lobo telling John and Clark that there are more out there like themselves, and he rides off. John flies off in hopes to find more Martians, and Superman tells Lois that he can't interview today and flies off. And that's pretty much where the movie ends. So what did I think of Superman, Man of Tomorrow? Well, the first thing that surprised me in this movie is that it has that, like, DCEU beginning of the movie thing, you know? And I was not expecting that. Honestly, this is one of those things that I like about the movie. Is that Clark is in his early stages of, like, figuring out who he is. When he and Lobo fight, Lobo calls him Kryptonian, and Clark doesn't know how to take it because he doesn't know who or what a Kryptonian is, and he isn't even sure that he is one. I find it interesting how in this movie, Clark has this pyramid thing that is about Krypton that he's spent years trying to open but was not able to. Most Superman media, Clark gets a crystal that leads to the formation of the Fortress of Solitude, where he meets like a hologram of his dad who tells Clark everything about Krypton and who he is and all of that stuff. And I like that this movie's different takes on the origin of Superman by Clark knowing he's different based on his abilities he has, but doesn't have everything figured out 100% because no fortress and no hologram dad to tell him exactly who he is and where he comes from and why he was sent to Earth. I also thought it was interesting how, you think Lex is going to be the villain, but then you think, no, Lobo's going to be the villain, but then it's neither of them. It's this purple goo that bonds to this random guy and turns him into some weird energy creature thing that's going to be the villain, and Superman is going to work with Lex and Lobo as well as John, who's very much alive, to take down the big creature. I liked that personally, seeing all these people work together to defeat a big bad. The sound design was really great in this movie. It really accompanied the animation well. Every punch and every action felt like it had a lot of weight to it, and yeah, they did an excellent job. Also, the music did a good job presenting the tone of the movie, not as overly heroic with big heroic trumpet themes, right? But more of this sci-fi horror kind of tone to the movie, which I kind of enjoyed that. The only thing that I think this is a negative about this movie is that I thought the character outlines were kind of too thick, but that's kind of it. This is really small. Maybe it's just me not being used to DC animated movies with thick outlines, but that's the only negative I have. Superman, Man of Tomorrow is a good and enjoyable movie, and that's going to do it for the movie and TV talk segment. And that is also going to do it for the 22nd BrettCast episode. If you like this kind of content, feel free to subscribe. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and I may answer a question or discuss a comment in a future episode. And with that, that's all I got. Thank you for watching or listening, and goodbye.